Just been watching an interesting exchange between Hugh Grant and Paul McMullen. If you have followed the phone hacking scandal in the United Kingdom by News Corp, then you'll have some idea of who Paul McMullen is. Hugh Grant is more famous. He's a famous actor. If you're not British, basically, this is in the context of a massive scandal that involved the tabloid press and basically hacking into the phones of hundreds of individuals, many of them public figures but also private individuals, including relatives of murder victims, a very wide range of people. I believe it's over 800 people. The subsequent fallout from this has been going on for a few years now, but it's I believe the implications are still very much there. I don't intend to talk in detail about the phone hacking scandal in this video, but I want to talk a little bit about something that McMullen has just come out with in this exchange, because it's a typical tactic of tabloid insiders. Their attitude to the whole phone hacking situation has been one of complete, in my view, cowardice, because what they have done is cry crocodile tears. I don't believe they're sorry at all. I believe they're only sorry they got caught out. Why do I have that view? Because if they really had any sort of regret about the sort of culture that went on at News of the World, notably phone hacking, but the actual culture. You see, phone hacking is really just the tip of the iceberg. This is about a culture in tabloid journalism. They've got no regrets. There's been some reforms in terms of not allowing phone hacking to happen again, but the actual culture of tabloid journalism hasn't changed at all. That proves that their apologies and regret about hurting people is bullshit. I just don't buy it for a second. I think they're only sorry they got caught out. But there's something notable in this exchange. It was probably from last year, I don't know the date exactly, but the issues are still relevant because it's an ongoing thing. Hugh Grant and Paul McMullen were having this exchange. McMullen was going on about Dover workmen who wouldn't have any sympathy for a very wealthy actor, complaining about his privacy being invaded. Now this is sort of deflection, because it's kind of a populist statement, like because he's wealthy and successful, then he has to take the pressures of fame. Now Hugh Grant's not stupid. He knew when he got into the acting business, and he's quite a colourful character, he's outspoken. He knew there'd be pressure involved, and so does most celebrities. And I think that whilst there are cynical attention seekers out there, most people in their field are just trying to do well in their field. They're trying to be a good actor, they're trying to be a good singer, or whatever their endeavour is. And it's almost like they're being punished for success. Now, we live in a country that has some of the biggest wealth poverty, has the biggest wealth poverty gap in the developed world, possibly. So there are legitimate issues to be asked about wealth and poverty and so on. But believe me, of all people, tabloid hacks are not the people to do it. So for McMullen to come out with this sort of man of the people, Robin Hood type attitude is so phony. He couldn't give a shit about Britain's poor, nor can any tabloid hack. And basically it's deflection. It's saying that if you're famous you deserve to suffer. But the point that Hugh Grant made was the victims of phone hacking are not just wealthy celebrities and powerful people. They are innocent, well, I say innocent, but in my view most phone hacking victims were innocent, but people who couldn't defend themselves in the same way, who don't have PR agents who can make statements for them and so on, who are normal people. For example, relatives of Millie Dowler, the young schoolgirl who was murdered, and numerous other people who have been targeted by the gutter press. Basically, the Murdoch empire was much more akin to a mafia outfit than a professional news corporation. In their behaviour, it was basically thuggish. It was based on bribery, it was based on intimidation, it was based on arrogance, and it was based on threats. And everything that's been revealed by the Leveson inquiry has shown that. This isn't just bias from my point of view because I happen to hate tabloids. This has actually been proven. I just find one of the most striking things about the phone hacking scandal is these people have the audacity, after coming out with their crocodile tears and apologies, to whinge about being persecuted and to hide behind freedom of the press. Of course it's essential to have freedom of press and democracy, but their behaviour has actually damaged that value. It's actually done nothing as an asset to democracy. And I still believe that there needs to be a situation whereby I'm utterly 100% against self-regulation. I think that's like letting the fox guard the chickens. Basically, tabloid journalists are liars. They can't be trusted. That is without question. Their entire culture, their entire working culture is built on bullying, is built on distortion, and is built actually on getting paparazzi photos, and this is something that is often overlooked. Someone like Paul McMullen says, oh, it's harmless, it's just a little bit of, you're famous, you should accept it. Okay, here's a caveat. Sienna Miller is a famous actress, she's a wealthy woman, but that doesn't justify a dozen male paparazzi following her around, making her frightened, making a young woman frightened wherever she went. That is precisely the sort of behaviour that the tabloids directly endorse by buying paparazzi photos. If you look at some of the photos in The Sun or the Daily Mail or the defunct News of the World, they're not natural photos. That's because they're directly bought from the paparazzi. The tabloids aren't stupid, they don't directly employ the paparazzi, but they're like this basically. So essentially the tabloid industry legitimizes stalking. That's what it is. And for the record, I don't buy into this thing that because you're famous you deserve to take that sort of treatment. Being famous, if you're a famous actor, you should expect scrutiny about your acting skills, you should expect maybe some tough interviews, but no one deserves to be stalked. So this bullshit that McMullen was coming out with, that because you're famous you deserve that, it's just rubbish. Now, Hugh Grant's a pretty stoic figure, he's a strong character, but there's other people out there who are a lot more vulnerable, and that is particularly despicable. What McMullen said may technically be true. Most members of the public don't care that much about the celebrities, although personally I don't think that justifies the way they were treated. But when the tabloids targeted people who couldn't defend themselves, that shows just how awful phone hacking was. And the point is, this culture continues because on a daily basis, what do they do with their headlines? Yes, they may attack the powerful, but they also attack people completely unable to defend themselves. And there's two groups in particular that are constantly vilified by the gutter press. They are unemployed people and immigrants. On almost a daily basis you will see at least one tabloid with glaring British headlines talking about benefit fraud or talking about immigrants taking British jobs, this sort of thing. Now, of course those are legitimate issues to discuss, but the way the tabloids do it is based on distortion, it's based on collective vilification, i.e. saying all unemployed people are lazy scroungers. I actually believe tabloid editors are some of this country's biggest parasites because they feed off other people's personal trauma. If a celebrity goes through a difficult marriage breakup, you can guarantee the gutter press will be all over it. And then they'll come out with, oh well, they're famous, so they have to accept that. To me, there's no public interest whatsoever. Hugh Grant made a good point. Well, actually, this matter of public interest, it's about what the public is interested in versus what they actually need. And of course there's an interest, but that doesn't mean it's right. That doesn't mean that it justifies it. This might seem like an extreme comparison, but when people turned up at Tyburn to watch public hangings, there was an interest, but there was absolutely nothing that benefited society by that sort of situation. Now, obviously, I'm not saying tabloids are akin to public hangings, but when you consider they've driven people to suicide, it's not an exaggeration that what Hugh Grant called it, a culture of pure evil. I believe it is. I believe these people are... I just don't think they have any human compassion. They happen to be very clever and they're good at arguing the case, but when you look at their sort of behaviour and you consider the fact that they haven't changed it at all, then really, saying it's a culture of pure evil is not an exaggeration. Tabloids have driven people to suicide. They have falsely implicated innocent people and then put an apology in small writing on page 35. This is the sort of culture that Hugh Grant was referring to. It's not about him being a wealthy actor. That's another issue. If you want to attack him for being a wealthy actor, fine. Talk about Britain's wealth-poverty gap. But the gutter press... Oh, by the way, tabloid editors have a much bigger salary than the Prime Minister, so they can hardly talk about... And tabloid hacks are on pretty good salaries as well, so they're hardly in a position to whinge about, you know, the marginalised of society. And it's actually very cynical, because those Dover builders that McMullen was talking about, the gutter press exploit those people. They feed into their prejudices about immigrants, about the unemployed, and frankly, a lot of tabloid readers are ignorant people. I'm not going to make myself popular by saying that, but they don't realise actually tabloid editors are laughing in their face. The average reader of a tabloid, the idea that the likes of McMullen actually respect these people is bullshit. As far as I'm concerned, tabloid hacks, and especially tabloid editors, are vultures. And unlike politicians, now politicians can be cynical, they can be greedy, they can be motivated by the wrong reasons, they can be corrupt. Not everyone. You have, in my opinion, decent parliamentarians like Tom Watson who expose these bastards, but anyway, at least, with all their faults, at least politicians have a mandate. At least they have went out there, taken heat from the public, canvassed, campaigned to get into the position that they're in. They have a mandate. That's not the same as saying they're good at the job or they're bad at the job or whatever, but the point is they have a mandate. What mandate do tabloid editors have? They'll turn around and say, oh well, people buy our papers, but they never ever have to face public grillings. They never have their constant daily activity scrutinised by the public and by the press. So in that sense, politicians face far more scrutiny. And yet politicians are the people who put themselves up for scrutiny. Tabloid editors slink behind their editorial desks, spewing out their hateful distortion on a daily basis, and they never have to face public grillings. When was the last time you saw an active tabloid editor on Question Time? You get ex-tabloid editors like Kelvin Mackenzie, but whereas you would get active politicians on Question Time, you never get active tabloid editors on the panel of Question Time. In other words, they never have to face heat from the public, not directly. Yes, they're under a lot of pressure to meet deadlines before midnight, and I understand that. Actually, I've read Piers Morgan's book about his 10 years inside, and that was really revealing. Now, I have a lot of respect for what Piers Morgan has done on the gun issue in America, but I've no respect for his time as a tabloid editor. He was a typical tabloid editor, motivated by massive ego, motivated by a bullying culture, motivated by... I mean, if you read that book, it's, I forget the exact name, I think it's called The Inside or something like that. It was about his time as editor of the Daily Mirror, and before that he was at one of the Murdoch papers. But if you look at that, that shows exactly what sort of culture tabloid journalism is. And, you know, the average member of public who buys these rags will think, oh, it's harmless, you know, and they'll point out that, you know, the tabloids aren't stupid because they will put neutral stories out there that no one could disagree with. They'll put funny, amusing stories that are not particularly cruel or nasty. But no matter how many types of stories out there that could be described as neutral, that doesn't really justify the poisonous side of tabloid journalism, which in my view is poisonous for society. And I agree with you, Grant, it is a culture of pure evil. This idea that celebrities run to the tabloid press is also based on distortion. Because if you're a successful actor and you're on the red carpet and you have a dozen cameras flashing in your face, you don't have time to say, oh, which newspaper do you work for? They ask you a question, you answer it. It's not like, I appreciate that. I'm not stupid. I know high-level celebrities can pick and choose what interviews they do and so on. And I'm not saying they're entirely blameless. Of course there are egomaniacs in the celebrity world. You get the likes of Katie Price. So I understand that. But the idea that because you're famous then you deserve to be stalked, that sort of notion that the tabloids try to justify is just beyond crap. There's certain positions of power, of course you should be scrutinised. For example, politicians should be scrutinised on their policies because policies impact lives. But I couldn't care less if an MP has cheated on his or her partner. It's not my business, and it doesn't affect me personally. It's a moral issue only for them. So when the tabloids plaster that sort of information all over the covers, no one can rationally argue that it does anything for democracy. It's nothing but sleazy intrusion. And I think we should learn something from France in this regard. When the French have personal problems, they see that as personal problems. I think we can learn something from that, because really, if a politician has a personal failing and it impacts a member of their family, that's something between them and their family. It's not my business as a voter. It really isn't. On the other hand, if they make a policy, for example workfare, that does impact thousands of people, of course it's of public interest. So it's this pendulum of what is public interest and what is just pure voyeurism, a form of voyeurism. So looking at McMullen's excuses is pathetic, and McMullen isn't even that high ranking compared to, if that's the attitude of someone who isn't that high ranking, you can imagine the attitude of some senior editors. Now I made a video about Rebecca Brooks whinging about how they felt like they were treated like terrorists, but the scale of this is massive. And I just find it so hypocritical that for years they basically had a career and they make their money out of pillorying public figures and people who can't defend themselves at the lower spectrum of society. In fact, the people who are least impacted by tabloid parasitism is probably average middle class people, because the most marginalised and the most powerful are the ones who get scrutinised most, actually. Now the tabloids will say, oh well, that shows we're fair because we scrutinise the powerful, but there's one problem with that: they don't scrutinise themselves. So yeah, they came out with their crocodile apologies, but it's just such a hypocritical culture. When Jeremy Kyle got attacked in Magaluf recently, and I have to admit, I had a little grin because I hate the man, but the Sun had this headline about, oh, poor Jeremy getting attacked. Yet if it was a benefit claimant in a similar situation, they would just say something like, Scrounger gets comeuppance, or something like this. So it's just a disgusting form of hypocrisy on their part. Now, by the way, Jeremy Kyle has contributed to the Sun, so he's in bed with them. One parasite working with another group of parasites. And I'm sorry for the strong language, but I really feel strongly about this. They vilify people not in a position to defend themselves, but when you look at their entire culture of what they do, pump out stories that are based on distortion, based on stereotypes, based on scaremongering, with no level of objectivity whatsoever. That is a form of parasitism. They're feeding off other people's problems, and it's disgusting, actually. And actually, I should say this isn't now just in tabloid journalism. You start to see it in so-called professional journalism as well. You know, when Jeremy Paxman left Newsnight, I have to say I didn't cry a tear for that, because I think he was starting to represent this sort of gotcha style journalism, which is not professional. It's just and based on ego, as far as I'm concerned. And I actually think Jeremy Paxman probably would be capable of being a good journalist. Unfortunately, he let his gotcha bullshit get the better of him. He even said himself once that he regretted sort of putting Charles Kennedy, the former Liberal Democrat leader, on a pedestal when he was struggling with alcoholism. He actually felt guilty about that afterwards. But you know, this all comes down to this thing that if you're powerful, you deserve scrutiny. Well, if you voluntarily put yourself into a position whereby you're going to be a public figure, of course you should expect scrutiny. And if I was ever to be a successful person, I would respect the fact that I need to deal with that. I would respect the fact that as a public figure, I would receive a certain level of scrutiny. But there are certain things that they cannot justify, such as stalking. And I've just got nothing but contempt for the tabloid press and their pathetic excuses, and their hypocrisy, and their So, you know, when Paul McMullen was trying to deflect this by pointing out that Hugh Grant was a wealthy actor, when really the real issue here is what tabloid journalism is all about.